Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really diving deep, maybe into the deepest waters philosophy has. We're asking, how do we actually understand things? How does language even work? And, what are logic and mathematics at their very core?
Yeah, it's fundamental stuff. And the sources we're looking at today, they don't just nudge the boat, they really try to flip it over. Radically paradigm shifting is a good way to put it.
Absolutely. Our mission, yours and ours, is to explore what meaning actually means. We're deliberately setting aside that common idea, that intuition, that language is some kind of, mystical mirror reflecting reality.
Or that understanding is this secret spark happening inside your brain, that aha moment.
Yeah.
We're asking you, our listener, to consider language differently. Think of it as a structured system, something external, rule-bound, almost like a calculus.
Exactly, a calculus. So this dive is really an analysis of the grammar of thought. And when we say grammar, we don't just mean sentence structure like in school.
No, not prescriptive rules like don't split infinitives. We mean the fundamental rules that actually make meaning possible, the constitutive rules.
And if we can unpack this properly, it potentially changes everything. How you think about intention or knowledge or even consciousness. It shifts them from being these huge, maybe unanswerable metaphysical questions
Into questions about grammar, about how we use these words, how these concepts function within the rules of our language games.
The focus then becomes purely on the relationship between signs, the words, symbols, gestures we use, and their actual use, how they're applied in practice.
That's where the source material insists meaning is found, not in some hidden mental realm, but in the established public use.
And the payoff for you listening right now could be this incredible sense of clarity. If you've ever felt kind of weighed down by all the philosophical baggage tied to concepts like proof or truth or intention.
This framework offers a way through. An intellectual shortcut? Maybe. It suggests the real logic of these concepts is found inside the rules of the system we've set up, not by looking for some hidden essence out there in the world or deep inside the mind.
Okay, let's do it. Let's jump in and tackle maybe the biggest sacred cow first. This idea of understanding as some kind of purely inward private event.
Right.
When we talk about learning something new or having a breakthrough, we almost always talk about it like it's a single moment. The penny dropped, it clicked, I suddenly got it.
We treat understanding, especially understanding something difficult, like a complex idea or proposition, as if it's one single instantaneous mental act, or maybe a specific mental state we suddenly arrive at.
Yeah, that feeling is very real. But what do our sources have to say about that common assumption? Is that feeling the understanding?
Well, they come down pretty hard on it. The critique is powerful. Understanding, the word itself, is explicitly not the name of a single unique psychological process. It's not one thing.
Not one thing, but it feels like one thing when it happens.
It might feel like something, but if you actually look at how we use the word understanding in everyday language, its application is, as the sources put it, infinitely various. That feeling of getting it, that aha moment.
Yeah.
That's likely just a psychological side effect, a sensation that accompanies this shift.
Okay, so it's not the understanding itself.
It's separate from the knowledge, from the ability. Real understanding, the kind that matters, happens against a background of a language you've already learned, with all its existing rules about how words and concepts are applied.
Okay, so that's the crucial split we need to keep in mind. Separating the psychological feeling from the actual intellectual ability or competence.
Precisely. And the chess analogy helps make this really clear, I think.
Right, the chess game. Let's unpack that.
Okay, imagine an expert chess player watching a grandmaster game. They see a really complex sequence of moves unfold. Now, their internal experience, the rapid calculations, recognizing deep patterns, maybe a sudden flash of insight about the underlying strategy that's going to be vastly different from a novice watching the same game.
Who just sees, wooden pieces moving on a board?
Pretty much. The expert might have that internal aha moment, that jolt of recognition. But is that feeling the knowledge of chess? Is that the understanding?
My first thought is, yeah, maybe. It feels like the moment the connection is made in the brain.
But the argument here is no. That fleeting internal experience isn't the core of the understanding. The understanding is the background ability. It's the capacity to apply the rules of chess consistently, to explain why that move was significant, what its consequences might be, to anticipate the opponent's strategy.
So the ability is the key thing.
Yes. Think about it. If you asked that same chess expert to multiply two large numbers, say 347 times 58, they could probably do it. They understand arithmetic. but they might not get that same thrilling internal aha feeling while doing the calculation.
Probably not. No, it might just feel like work.
Right. But their ability to perform the multiplication correctly still constitutes their understanding of arithmetic. The knowledge, the understanding, is the competence you possess, the ability to operate within the rules, not necessarily the feeling that goes along with it sometimes.
That clicks. Okay, so the internal feeling is more like a sign, maybe, or just something that happens alongside the understanding, but it's not the main event. It's not the substance.
Exactly. An epiphenomenon, perhaps. And we run into the same confusion when we think about understanding a complicated sentence or idea. The sources use another analogy, looking at a picture.
How does that work?
Well, imagine looking at a painting. If all you can see are patches and lines, just shapes and colors, you're processing the visual information, sure, but you don't really understand the picture yet.
Right, you haven't grasped what it's of.
Exactly. But then maybe your background knowledge kicks in, your familiarity with art history or different styles, and suddenly you see a genre picture in those same lines. Maybe it snaps into focus as a pastoral scene or a depiction of a historical battle.
Ah, so the way you see it changes completely.
Yes. The way of conceiving it changes. The understanding isn't just about the raw visual input. It's about applying an interpretive framework, using learned categories and conventions. That background is essential.
This shift in perspective, away from internal essences, also helps tackle something really common, that feeling of the inexpressible gap. You hear it all the time.
Oh, yeah. People say things like, my real understanding of this poem or this scientific concept or maybe this spiritual experience.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't put it into words.
It's only imperfectly exhibited by language. The ultimate thing is essentially inexpressible. That kind of talk.
Right. And when you hear that, the sources urge us to stop and look very closely at the grammar of that claim. What are they actually saying?
What's the problem with saying some things are inexpressible? It feels true sometimes.
Well, think about it. If someone truly believes there's this missing something, some core element of their understanding that words fail to capture, but they also claim that this missing bit is essentially inexpressible, then the statement kind of eats itself. If it were genuinely possible to express it more completely, if there was a way to capture that missing something in language, then it wouldn't be essentially inexpressible, would it?
Oh, I see. So if you could potentially say it better, it's not essentially inexpressible. And if it is essentially inexpressible, then talking about it as a missing something that could be added doesn't make sense.
Exactly. The statement becomes senseless because it's mixing grammars. It's using the language of a gap that could, in principle, be filled, while simultaneously insisting the gap is metaphysically impossible to fill. The frustration isn't really a limitation of language itself. It's more likely a confusion born from trying to locate meaning outside of language's actual function, in some mystical realm.
Okay, so we're trying to put meaning inside the head, or somewhere beyond language, and that's where the trouble starts. This leads to what the sources call the coupling delusion.
That's the coupling delusion. It's that strong feeling, especially when we mean our words seriously, when we're not just parroting something. It feels as if there's something coupled to the words.
Like a little packet of meaning or an intention attached to the sound or the symbol.
Precisely. A mental essence, maybe?
Yeah.
But this is exactly where, according to this view, meaning drops out of language. We start searching for this internal correlate, this mental state that matches the external sign.
But we won't find it there.
The argument is no. The actual criterion for whether an expression is meant thus, meant in this specific way, is never found by introspecting some hidden mental state. It's always found by looking at the relationship between external linguistic expressions.
How so? Give me an example.
Well, how do we check if someone meant bank, as in riverbank, or bank, as in financial institution? We ask them to paraphrase, right? To use different words, or maybe to point or to act it out. We look for consistency in their use of the word within the broader language system. It's about translation into another mode of representation, another move in the language game.
Okay, so understanding a word really just means being able to apply it correctly, knowing its use, its function.
That's the core idea. And this lack of a necessary internal coupling is shown really nicely with the penholder example. It's a famous one.
Right. Why can we understand the word red, but we can't just decide to understand a random object like this penholder on the desk?
If meaning was just about having a certain mental state or making a single instantaneous act of meaning something, you'd think we could just look at this penholder, concentrate really hard, and give it a meaning right then and there.
Yeah, why not? Just decide. This penholder now means stability.
But you can't really do that in a way that sticks, can you? Why not? Because we haven't given the pen holder a meaning by doing the necessary work, integrating it into a whole system of application, into a calculus.
It needs a role, a function within a larger set of rules.
Exactly. Meaning isn't bestowed by some singular mystical formula whispered over the object or a momentary consecration. Meaning requires embedding the sign, whether it's a word or potentially even an object used as a sign, into a whole framework of actions, rules, relationships, and consequences. It's the system that gives it meaning, not some inherent quality or a single mental act.
This really underscores that what we often call understanding gets misidentified. We talk about it as if it's this hypothetical mental state.
Like a configuration of neurons, maybe?
But the actual evidence we have for someone understanding something is always their behavior, right? Their ability to follow the rules, to use the word correctly, to pick out the red object when asked.
Yes. That observable behavior is just treated as a sign of the supposed internal state. It's the behavioral residue, if you like.
And because we often talk about mental states using grammar, that's similar to how we talk about physical process, like my brain is processing that. We mistakenly try to find the mechanism inside the head.
Right. But the rules of language, the patterns of use, they belong to a different kind of logical space entirely. It's not the same as describing a physical or biological mechanism.
Okay, so if understanding isn't purely internal, and it relies on this background language system, that throws a wrench into the traditional idea of how language gets started, doesn't it? Like with ostensive definitions.
It really does. Ostensive definition, just pointing at something and naming it. You know, pointing to a dog and saying dog, or pointing to a red patch and saying red. We often assume this is the bedrock, how language begins.
Seems pretty straightforward. Point and name.
But is it really unambiguous? Can pointing ever be truly unambiguous on its own?
Well, if I point at a red square.
What am I pointing at? The color red. The shape square, the material paper, the object, this piece of paper, maybe even the fact that it's illuminated light, or color itself, or this thing here.
Okay, yeah. Without context, the pointing itself is wide open to interpretation. It's fundamentally ambiguous.
It is. So the crucial question becomes, how does anyone, like a child learning language or someone learning a second language, ever successfully grasp what's intended by an ostensive definition?
How does it work then, if pointing alone isn't enough?
For the definition to actually work for the learner to correctly understand that you mean the color when you point and say red, they must already grasp a great deal of language.
They need some existing framework.
Yes. Critically, they need to already understand the category the word belongs to. They need to know what a color is, conceptually. Someone has to say or imply that color is called red. The word color settles the grammar.
It tells them what kind of word red is, how it's going to be used, what slot it fits into.
Exactly. It tells them the role, the part of the language game this new piece belongs to.
Yeah.
So the definition isn't some foundational primary act that stands alone. It's just another rule within an already established calculus.
And it only works when it's actually used, when it's applied.
Precisely. It only becomes effective through application. It's not like getting a vaccination, a one-time shot that changes you forever and fixes the meaning instantly. And it doesn't work at a distance just by stating the rule. You have to practice using it. The whole system, the whole calculus, has to be up and running first for the definition to find its place.
Okay, so the weight really shifts entirely onto grammar and use. If understanding isn't some secret inner process, and even basic definitions depend on an existing language system, then meaning must be purely about position, about its role in the system.
That's the core argument, yes.
Yeah.
The meaning of a word is defined entirely by its role in the calculus of language, flat out.
Yeah.
The use of a word in the language is its meaning.
And thinking this way helps us see the problems with what the sources call primitive philosophy of language.
Absolutely. Like the view attributed to Augustine, for instance. The idea that basically all words function like names for objects, table, chair, person, number, color.
That every word corresponds to a thing.
Right. It's a very simple picture, maybe intuitive at first, but it's seen as primitive because it ignores the huge variety of ways words function. What about words like but, if, perhaps, hello, ouch? They don't name objects.
They have jobs to do in the sentence, in the interaction.
Exactly. They have grammatical functions, roles within the rules, and if you force everything into the naming objects model, you end up saying really awkward, maybe nonsensical things, like the example given. A fact is a complex of objects.
That sounds weird. What does that even mean?
Well, it's the kind of philosophical tangle you get into if you think words must map onto things. It ignores that facts are expressed by propositions, which have a structure determined by grammatical rules, not just by listing objects.
Okay, so to keep this distinction clear, the difference between a word's use, its sense, and maybe its psychological effect on us, the pianola analogy is brought in.
Yes, the player piano. It works with a perforated paper roll, right? The holes in the roll pass over a tracker bar, air flows through, and that triggers the piano keys.
Right, holes cause notes.
So the holes are the signs. The sounds produced are the effect. But what is the sense of those holes? Is it the sound?
I guess the sense is more like what note the hole represents according to the system.
Exactly. The sense is their purpose within the mechanism of the pianola,
Mm-hmm.
their role in the system that's designed to reproduce a musical score. If you could express that purpose with a rule like, this specific configuration of holes corresponds to playing a C sharp for one beat, then that rule is the sense.
And whether that C sharp makes me feel happy or sad or reminds me of my childhood, that's irrelevant to its sense within the system.
Totally irrelevant to the philosophical grammar of the sign, the psychological effectiveness, the associations, the memories triggered. That's a separate issue. We're focused on the role within the calculus.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's extend this beyond just words to actions. We often confuse reasons for actions with causes of actions. If my boss tells me to open the door and I do it, it feels like a simple cause and effect chain.
It does feel like that.
Yeah.
But the sources insist we should view it differently. Deriving an action from a command, like opening the door because you were told to, is logically equivalent to deriving a result in a calculation, like writing out the steps of a math problem.
How so? One seems like physics, the other like logic.
The feeling that some causality was operating here, making you open the door, is seen as a confusion. You opened the door because you understood the command and followed the implicit rule or convention associated with it. You acted based on a reason, the command understood within a social and linguistic context, not purely because of a physical cause, like sound waves hitting your eardrum triggering a specific muscle reaction.
So a reason provides justification within a system of rules, whereas a cause is just a physical precursor.
That's a good way to put it. A reason justifies. A cause merely precedes or triggers. And this distinction holds even for things like expectation or belief.
Like my belief that if I touch that fire, it will burn me, or my fear that the old roof might collapse. Are those based on reasons or causes?
The sources argue they're based on reasons, operating within a calculus. The belief that fire will burn you is said to be of the same nature as the fear that it will burn you. Both are expectations.
Okay. How are they guided by a calculus?
Well, your expectation that the house won't collapse isn't just some random psychological event, some arbitrary feeling of safety that just happens,
Yeah.
a cause.
Yeah.
It's based on reasons, knowledge about building materials, engineering principles, maybe inspections. These reasons belong to a calculus, a system of understanding structural integrity.
Whereas maybe a phobia, like an intense irrational fear of spiders when there's no danger, might be closer to a cause or reaction not grounded in the relevant calculus of risk.
That seems like a plausible distinction, yes. The key is whether the expectation or action is guided by rules and justifications within a relevant system or game.
Okay. But if reasons only make sense within a game and the chain of reasons always stops at the boundary of the game, like we can't really ask why the rules of chess are what they are just are the rules of chess.
Well,
doesn't that make our whole system of logic and language seem fundamentally arbitrary, maybe even groundless, if the tennis rules aren't justified by anything outside the game itself?
That is the radical conclusion, yes. But it's crucial to grasp the nature of this arbitrariness. It's not saying anything goes or that it's all subjective chaos,
How so?
because these grammatical and logical rules are constitutive. They don't describe the world. They create the framework through which we understand and describe the world. They determine what counts as meaningful, what counts as a valid move within that particular language game.
Okay, so they're arbitrary in the same way that choosing to measure length in meters versus feet is arbitrary.
Exactly that sense. We need some unit of measurement to talk about length coherently, but the specific choice of unit, meters, feet, cubits, doesn't reflect some deep truth about length itself. It's a convention we adopt. Once adopted, though, the rules for using meters are rigid.
Let's really dig into the cookery contrast here. That seems key to understanding this constitutive nature of grammar.
Right. Think about cookery, about following a recipe. We wouldn't usually call the rules of a recipe arbitrary, would we?
No, because there's a point to them. You follow them to get a certain result, hopefully, a delicious cake.
Precisely. Cookery has a clearly defined purpose or goal, the end product, the edible. hopefully tasty dish. If you follow the recipe meticulously and the cake is still terrible or burnt or raw, you've failed. You cooked wrongly, according to an external standard, the goal of making good cake.
Okay, so cookery rules aren't arbitrary because they serve an external purpose. How is language different?
Language, in this view, is not defined for us as an arrangement fulfilling a definite purpose. In the same way, there isn't one single overarching goal like making cake that all of language serves, against which we can judge grammatical rules as correct or incorrect in achieving that goal.
So if I decide to use different grammatical rules, say, I start using the word blue to refer to the color we normally call red. Am I speaking wrongly?
According to this view, not necessarily wrongly in the sense of failing to achieve some predefined purpose of language, you're simply speaking of something else. You're playing a different language game, using a different calculus where blue functions differently.
So failure in cookery is empirical failure, bad cake. Failure in grammar, if you deviate, is just speaking a different language, or maybe just speaking nonsense if your rules aren't coherent.
Exactly. It's a category shift.
Yeah.
This brings us right back to logical necessity. Think about a fundamental rule of logic, like two negations yield an affirmation. Not P means P.
Seems like a basic truth about negation.
But is it a discovery about negation? Like discovering that hydrogen and oxygen combine to yield water, a fact about the world?
Maybe not. It feels more like how negation works.
Exactly. The sources argue this rule doesn't describe some hidden property of a thing called negation. Instead, the rule constitutes what we mean by negation in this particular logical system. It's a rule for how we use the sign not, specifically, a rule for replacing one sign configuration, not P, with another P.
It defines the move.
It defines the move. It tells you what's permissible within this calculus. If someone came along and said, in my system, two negations don't yield an affirmation, they wouldn't necessarily be wrong about negation in some absolute sense.
It'd just be proposing a different game, a different logic with different rules.
Precisely. A different grammar, a different calculus where not functions differently. Think intuitionistic logic, perhaps.
Okay, so the philosopher's job changes then. It's less about discovering deep, hidden truths about reality or concepts.
And more about achieving clarity, about carefully describing and untangling the rules of the language games we already play, understanding the calculus.
And the sense of any proposition, any statement, is just its role within that calculus.
Yes. And crucially, philosophy has to start with the distinction between sense and nonsense. It can't somehow give that distinction a deeper foundation because the grammar, the rules of the calculus, are the foundation.
So when we say something like, you can't cut redness into bits, what kind of statement is that? It's obviously true. You can't saw the color red in half.
But is it true like, you can't cut this diamond with a butter knife is true, a physical impossibility? Or is it true in a different way?
It feels different.
The argument is that red can't be cut into bits isn't describing a physical limitation, it's stating a grammatical rule. The very idea of cutting a color into bits makes no sense within the language game we have adopted for talking about colors. The concept red doesn't belong to the category of things that can be cut.
So the boundaries of sense aren't walls imposed by the physical world, but they're the lines drawn by the rules of our language games.
That's the idea. The limits are logical, grammatical, not empirical.
Okay, we've laid the groundwork. Meaning is use, grammar sets the rules. Now let's circle back to that inner world, to thinking itself. If there aren't these hidden meanings attached to words inside our heads, then what exactly is thinking? It feels like the most internal thing we do.
It does. But armed with this framework, we approach it differently. Thinking, the sources suggest, is interesting for philosophy primarily as a calculus, as a process of manipulating signs according to rules, not principally as a biological or psychological activity happening in the brain or mind stuff.
So when I'm thinking in language, silently talking to myself, working through an idea, the language isn't just expressing the thought, it is the thought.
In a crucial sense, yes. The language itself is the vehicle of thought. There aren't these other ghostly meanings or silent pictures floating alongside the words, which the words then merely represent. The manipulation of the signs is the thinking process being analyzed here.
But thinking feels so mysterious sometimes. The sources acknowledge this, right? They say thought strikes us as queer.
It does. But when does it strike us as queer? Not usually while we're actually doing it, while we're absorbed in the process of thinking or calculating.
No, usually afterwards, when you reflect on it.
Exactly. The mystery arises retrospectively. It's an invention we create when we look back and mistakenly impose a certain picture onto the process. We imagine that our thinking somehow reached out and connected objects in the mind with objects in the real world, as if we caught reality in our net.
So the feeling of queerness, of mystery, isn't inherent in the thinking process itself.
It's located in the grammar we use to talk about thinking afterwards. We use misleading analogies. Thinking is seeing, thinking is manipulating internal objects, and then we get puzzled by the very pictures we've created. The mystery is grammatical, not metaphysical.
This seems especially relevant when you try to grasp intention. We feel strongly that when we intend to do something, our intention must somehow contain a perfect blueprint, an extremely faithful picture of the intended action.
Yes, so we imagine this detailed internal preview. But then the sources ask us to look closely at this supposed internal picture of the blueprint. Imagine you could isolate it, hold it up mentally. Viewed purely on its own, that picture is suddenly dead. It doesn't inherently automatically point outside itself to the future action. A static picture of me raising my hand doesn't in itself contain the future action of raising my hand.
It needs something else to connect it. It needs the context, the rules, the grammar of intention.
Precisely. It needs the whole system of practices and rules that constitute what we call intending. And this deep dissatisfaction, we often feel this sense that no description of a physical or mental process can ever fully capture the aboutness, the directedness of intention. That feeling is real.
And it tempts us to say that intending can't be any process at all. It must be something completely different, something non-physical.
Yes, that's the temptation. But the diagnosis here is that this dissatisfaction arises from a grammatical confusion. We're trying to cram the concept of intention, which functions like a rule, a stance within a game, into the grammatical box of a physical or mental process, which functions like a description of events. They have different logics.
Okay. This also relates to how we think about anticipation, right? The idea that an order or an expectation somehow contains a shadowy existence of the thing being ordered or expected.
Exactly. Does the command, "Bring me a book," contain a ghostly image of the completed action?
It feels like it points towards it, directs towards it.
It does direct towards it, but not because it contains a shadow. The shadowy anticipation of the fact is simply our ability, granted by the language game, to think about something that hasn't happened yet, to operate within the calculus of orders, expectations, and fulfillments. The order is just the sign. Its connection to the fulfillment is established by the rules of the game we're playing.
Okay, so the rules connect the sign, the order, to the fulfillment, the action. How tight is that connection? The sources use a comparison with mathematical calculation.
Yes, and this is a really important, though maybe subtle point about how determination works within a calculus. Let's take the calculation example. $25 times $25.
Okay, which equals 625.
Right. Now imagine someone is doing the calculation, and maybe they make a slip in an intermediate step. Maybe they write down 125 somewhere incorrectly, but they were still following the rules of multiplication, the overall procedure. The argument is that the initial setup, the expectation, 25 times 25 what's C's, Libort Hall, determines the correct result, 625, to exactly the same degree, regardless of the intermediate slip. The fulfillment, 625, is determined by the expectation, the calculation undertaken according to the rules, because both are governed by the same internal, rigorous calculus.
So the determination isn't about psychological certainty or even getting every step right. It's about the logical structure defined by the rules. The form of the expectation dictates the form of the fulfillment within that system.
Precisely. The rules bridge the gap. The relationship between expectation and fulfillment is shown to be internal to the calculus, just like the relationship between a mathematical problem and its correct solution.
Okay, if the connection is that internal, that rule-bound, then what about that other common picture? The idea of a proposition being like a ruler laid against reality.
Yeah, that metaphor suggests measurement, comparison. The proposition somehow reaches out and measures the world.
But how does that fit with meaning being used?
Well, even if we think of the proposition as a picture of a possible state of affairs, the ruler analogy still ultimately points back to grammar, because it depends entirely on our grammar, the rules we've set up, what counts as a possible state of affairs in the first place. What can the picture legitimately depict?
So the ruler itself, the proposition, only functions as a measure because we've defined the units and the rules for how to use it. The grammar dictates what counts as a match or mismatch with reality.
Exactly. The capacity of the proposition to represent or measure reality isn't inherent in the proposition itself. It's granted by the arbitrary yet rigid system of rules, the grammar we employ.
This same pattern mistaking rule following for internal comparison seems to apply to recognition and memory, too. When I say, oh, this face looks familiar.
The immediate temptation is to think you're comparing the face you see now with some kind of stored image, a picture in my catalog, as the sources put it.
Yeah, like matching it to a photo in my mental album.
But then the regress problem hits immediately. If the face is familiar because it matches the picture, what makes the picture itself familiar? Do you need another picture to compare the first picture to?
Right, that goes on forever. So what's the alternative?
The suggestion is that familiarity isn't primarily a process of comparing copies. It's more like an immediate recognition that the thing seen fits. It slots into a pre-existing sheath, a practiced form of imagining, or a category within our linguistic system. It's the feeling of fitting into the pattern, not necessarily finding an identical match.
And what about the certainty we feel in our memories? I am absolutely sure I locked the door yesterday. Where does that certainty come from? We often feel like we're reading it off a vivid memory image.
We do feel that way. But if you're pressed, how do you know? What proves your memory image corresponds to the past reality? Often, the bedrock answer isn't another piece of evidence.
It's just, I remember, or I'm certain.
Exactly. Nothing. I was certain. The certainty often functions as the endpoint within the memory language game. It doesn't always rely on, or isn't justified by, some specific, verifiable mental act or image that guarantees its truth. Memory, like expectation, often operates based on established patterns and conventions, not moment-by-moment internal verification.
Okay, one last thing in this section. Seeing aspects. This is fascinating. Like looking at a drawing that can be a duck or a rabbit, or seeing a smile, and one moment it looks kind, the next moment malicious.
Yeah.
Or seeing courage in someone's face.
Yes, the phenomenon of aspect dawning. This connects very directly to that contrast we discussed earlier between simply saying words and truly meaning them.
How so?
Think about what the sources call primary symbols. These aren't arbitrary signs we've learned. They're more like the natural, ingrained expressions of a state or quality. Like a dog genuinely wagging its tail isn't just a sign of friendliness. It's part of what we call friendliness in a dog, or certain open expression on a human face.
So these aren't just clues pointing to an inner feeling. They are part of the feeling, manifested.
In a sense, yes. They are parts of the phenomena we call friendliness or courage or kindness. And it's our familiarity with these primary, often embodied expressions that allows us to then read an aspect into other, perhaps more ambiguous situations or features. We're not just adding a purely intellectual interpretation onto a dead sign. We're using a practiced, often bodily-based perceptual and linguistic structure to interpret the world.
Okay, let's pivot now and apply this whole framework, meaning as use, grammar as constitutive rules, to the place where rules seem most explicit and rigid, logic and mathematics.
Right. If language is fundamentally a calculus, a rule-governed activity, what does that make mathematics?
Well, the immediate thought is another calculus, a game with very strict rules.
That's exactly the line taken. Calling mathematics a game is described as neither more nor less wrong than calling moving chess pieces according to rules a calculation. Both involve manipulating symbols according to rules.
Are there key differences, though, between math and chess?
Oh, definitely. One obvious difference mentioned is that in arithmetic, unlike chess, there isn't really winning or losing in the same way. And perhaps more profoundly, a mathematical proposition like 2 plus 2 equals 4 doesn't seem to be true or false in the same sense that an empirical proposition like it's raining outside is true or false.
How so? 2 plus 2 equals 4 feels about as true as anything gets.
True within the system of arithmetic, yes. But its truth isn't established by checking against the world in the way we check the weather. Its truth is established by the rules of arithmetic themselves. It's a rule of the game.
Okay, so if math is fundamentally this rule-governed calculus, and it isn't ultimately about anything external, not about discovering truths in some platonic heaven, nor just describing the physical world, what does that mean for all the philosophical work that's gone into trying to justify the foundations of math, finding the ultimate ground for arithmetic?
It basically pulls the rug out from under much of that project. If mathematics is a self-contained calculus, defined by its own internal rules, then the whole idea of metamathematics, a grand theory standing outside math that could somehow guarantee its truth or foundations, becomes largely unnecessary, maybe even incoherent.
So logical analysis can't reveal some deeper, essential truth about numbers or mathematical reality.
It can't discover truths about math in that sense. What logical work can do is clarify the rules, make the connections explicit, perhaps reveal inconsistencies within a chosen set of rules, or explore the consequences of adopting different rules. But it's always working within or on the calculus, not uncovering truths external to it. We're not discovering mathematical reality, we're exploring the consequences of the definitions and rules we've laid down.
This completely changes the nature of mathematical proof, then. A proof isn't discovering a pre-existing truth.
It's seen more as establishing the place of a proposition within the calculus. Once a mathematical proposition has been successfully proved according to the accepted rules, it acquires, as the sources say, a bias towards truth in its grammar.
Meaning it becomes part of the accepted rules, part of the standard for correctness.
Yes. The proof is the method of checking, the procedure that justifies accepting the proposition. And that method, that proof procedure, corresponds to the very sense of the mathematical proposition. The proof defines what it means for that proposition to be valid within this system.
So you can't even really talk about proving the contradictory of a proven mathematical theorem.
Within that same system, no. Because the proof has established the theorem as a rule, or a consequence of the rules. To assert it's contradictory would be to break the rules of that specific game. It simply makes no sense within that calculus. The proof doesn't just confirm truth. It actively determines what gets accepted as mathematically valid. It builds the structure.
And this internal rigor is why certain kinds of arguments, like proofs based on analogy or circumstantial evidence, are rejected in pure mathematics. The sources mention Euler's proof as an example.
Right. Without going into the specific details of that particular proof, the critique is that it relied on things like confusing an infinite sum with the limit of a sum, using looser connections rather than strict step-by-step derivation following accepted rules. It's described, perhaps harshly, as absolutely never permitted.
Why such a strict stance?
Because the philosophy of mathematics being presented here is uncompromising on this point. In math, nothing must be except what is, meaning everything must be explicitly constructed or derived according to the rules. You can't just jump across a logical gap because the answer on the other side looks plausible or because you have a strong intuition.
The bridge has to be built step by step.
Exactly. The bridge of derivation, using only the permitted rules and definitions, has to be built. You can't just assume the connection.
Okay, let's talk about generalization in math. For instance, proving a general algebraic rule, like the associative law. Oh, A plus B plus C plus B plus B plus C do. Is this proof demonstrating some hidden truth about addition?
The view here is no. A proof like that isn't something you work out to discover if it's true. It functions more like a definition, or a fundamental rule, or a paradigm. It sets the standard that every calculation involving addition in that system must conform to. It constitutes part of the grammar of the plus sign in that calculus.
So it's laying down the law, not discovering it.
Pretty much. And furthermore, moving to generality often involves shifting to a different kind of calculus altogether. Consider a statement like, the circle is inside the square.
Okay.
If you just draw a picture of a circle generally inside a square, without specifying exact coordinates or sizes, that general sign, that picture, belongs to a different calculus than a precise architectural drawing, showing a circular feature at specific measurable coordinates within a square room.
They operate under different rules.
Yes. The rules governing variables in general statements, like a circle, a square, are logically distinct from the rules governing specific instances or particular values. Generalization isn't just scaling up. It can be a shift in the game itself.
This brings us to the really tricky territory, infinity. The limits of this calculus view seem most stark here. How do we handle general propositions about all numbers?
Right. Take a proposition like, there exists some natural number n such that $3 plus n is 77. How do we understand that?
Well, you could test it. 3 plus 0, 3, 3 plus 1, 4, 3 plus 2 was 5, 3 plus 2 is 6, 3 plus 4 is 7. Found it, N4.
Okay, that works for an existential quantifier. Exists, there exists.
Yeah.
But what about a universal one for all for all? How do we grasp for all natural numbers n is true, where the find is some property?
The common explanation is to think of it as a logical sum or product, right? Like phi and d forever.
Exactly. Or for the existential quantifier, it's often explained as $5, and so on.
What's the problem with phi and so on?
The sources argue that, and so on, is philosophically disastrous here. A genuine logical sum or product has a defined structure. It doesn't just trail off into vagueness. Using and so on isn't just acknowledging incompleteness. It's seen as substituting one unintelligible form, the infinite proposition, for another, an incomplete list ending in. It papers over the fundamental logical difference between finite and infinite.
We're trying to treat the infinite like it's just a really, really big finite number.
That's the temptation, yes. And this feeds directly into a common misconception about verification. We often feel like, okay, maybe we can't actually check if a property holds for all natural numbers, but surely there's a method in principle. We just can't complete it because of human weakness. We don't have infinite time.
Yeah, it feels like a practical limitation, not a logical one. If I had eternity, I could check every number.
But is it just a practical physical impossibility? Or is it a logical impossibility?
What's the difference here?
The argument is that the very concept of verification, in this context, implies the possibility of completing the check, of reaching the end of the process, of being able to survey the row of all natural numbers. But if the sequence of natural numbers is infinite, if the striding is endless, then it logically cannot lead to a goal, to a completed survey.
So it's not that we lack the time, it's that the concept of checking all of them doesn't actually make sense for an infinite series. The task itself is ill-defined.
Precisely. It's a logical impossibility stemming from the nature of infinity itself, as defined within our mathematical calculus. It's not a failure of our physical endurance. It's a feature of the system. The concept of an infinite class operates under different logical rules than a finite class, and we create confusion when we try to apply the methods of one directly to the other. The calculus itself dictates these limits. Hashtag outro. So pulling all these threads together from this really quite challenging deep dive, we've traced an argument for a fundamental shift in how we think about meaning, understanding, logic, truth.
It's a big shift, away from looking for answers in hidden mental processes or in some realities separate from language.
Exactly, and towards seeing meaning as something constituted, something created and upheld by the public, shared rules of our language games, the calculus we engage in together.
We've seen how viewing concepts like mathematical proof or negation or even expectation and intention, not as descriptions of hidden realities or inner states, but as rules for using signs, how that can bring clarity.
It dissolves a lot of the old philosophical puzzles, doesn't it? The moment you stop searching for the essence of understanding or the mechanism of intention and instead ask, how does this word work? The fog can lift.
The rules are just what we've adopted, what we teach each other.
Pretty much. We adopt the calculus of arithmetic, for example, not because the universe commands it or because it perfectly mirrors some Platonic realm, but because we've defined this system to work that way. It provides consistency, utility, a powerful tool. We teach the rules, and in doing so, we lay down the structure.
Okay, which leads us, as always, to a final thought for you, our listener, to take away and mull over, something to explore on your own.
Building on everything we've discussed.
If this whole system of language, this calculus with its rigid yet ultimately arbitrary grammar, if this system is precisely what enables us to think about things that haven't happened yet, that shadowy anticipation of fact, and if language itself is fluid, defined only by what we collectively call language,
then how much of what we perceive as reality, as the limits of possibility, is actually just a reflection, a logical consequence of the specific grammatical rules we happen to have learned and adopted? How much of the world is shaped not by the world itself, but by the language game we're playing?